Operations Tiger and Splice. Now, before I show my hat off, please note that I was bet by one of my cousins whether or not I could balance something on my head for the next 30 minutes. And they are watching me from outside the window. And I'm not going to drop behind on my recording schedule just because I'm doing something silly. So you will see how long it takes me to get a certain distance within this video, because at about 30 minutes I get to take this off and I no longer have to have my head cocked slightly to one side. Apologies. Don't worry, it's their turn to wear it next. So, whilst I'm doing this, we're going to talk about Operations Tiger and Splice. Now, they are Mediterranean resupply operations, two of many done in World War II. In fact, I've included them under the convoy runs, but they're not necessarily Malta convoy runs. But they are part of the convoys which go past Malta. And the thing about the Mediterranean is it's the biggest strategic problem of the war for the Royal Navy, because it means they can't link up their forces. We often talk about the Americans having a problem until the Panama Canal is built, because they're in a two-ocean fleet which I can't combine. We talk about the Russians and Soviets having a problem because they are in many ways a arguably four-ocean fleet, and they can't combine. Not easily. The British, well, they also have to be a four-ocean fleet, because they have to do the full Atlantic, north and south, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific, because of their empire. And the key part of that to get through quickly is the Mediterranean, which means that you need to do four oceans. Because, theoretically, if you can move through the Mediterranean, you cut off a huge amount of time in your voyage to the Far East. You cut off a huge amount of time in your voyage to the Indian Ocean. So therefore, that becomes critically important. With that being said, the Italians entering the war, they're also the opponent who it's most easy to avoid. If the British want to, they can run convoys around Africa and avoid most of the Italian fleet. So realistically, the Mediterranean becomes about two missions. Three, if you want to push it push it a bit more. One is resupply of Malta. Two is urgent resupply of Alexandria. And three, this is always a factor, actual combat operations. So therefore, the chances of engagement are not going to be regular run-of-the-mill convoys. It's not like the Bay of Biscay, it's not like the Arctic, it's not like the North Sea, it's not like all those scenarios where there's a constant flow of ships and convoys running around. No, when they turn up in the Mediterranean, they turn up hot and heavy. So we get a very different combat scenario and a very different experience from looking at the Mediterranean operations. Because it's not you engaging the forces that are available to escort one of a dozen convoys. You're engaging the forces available to escort a critical convoy. Sometimes those convoys, though, in earlier periods, didn't need, because of the situation, didn't need that heavy escort, and they'd run through without it. Sometimes they would. In the case of Tiger and Splice, which are some pretty good convoys to pick, and I'll be talking through the full list shortly, there is real reason behind their selection. There is real value behind their selection, because they are, quite simply, absolutely mundane and run-of-the-mill. They're not pedestal. They're not one of the bit convoys which we hear about because everything went bad or there was a massive fighting. No, these are convoys. They had some action. They got through. It was done. Like the vast majority of convoys and the vast majority of supplies. That being said, shameless book plug. Now, I do one of these in every single video. And the reason I do one in every single video is I'm an academic. I know. Funny thing on my head notwithstanding. And I'm being good. It hasn't dropped off yet. I do have to remember I have to keep my head cocked down. Because I have a PhD and I do like it, I want to teach universities. I can and I do. But if I want to get promoted, if I want to be taken on for other posts, I need to make sure I'm selling a lot of books, because that's how academics are evaluated in the UK. How many books they sell, how many journal articles they get published. Well, journal articles, that seems to be a rhyme and reason of itself. But books, I can do something about that. I can advertise them in every single video, and so I do. Because no one else is going to do it for me. And I have to say, it's thanks to you that it's done as well as it has done. Not just you who've bought it, but every person who's shared, liked, subscribed to these videos and grown them so they get picked up by the algorithm more and get seen by more people, and that leads... all that has had a cumulative impact, so thank you. You're the reason it's on a second edition. You're the reason that hopefully we'll get a third edition, and maybe more. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who does all that support. And here we go, the 1940 Convoy. Let's expand them out, shall we? Just a tad. So, in 1940, the convoys that run, where are they running from, where are they running to? And remember, convoys don't have to just get full ships to places. They have to get empty ships back. So, you might be running convoys from Malta to Alexandria. Why are you running those ships from Malta to Alexandria? You're getting ships out of Malta, maybe with people loaded on to get them away from Malta in case of it gets sieged, but also you're getting those empty ships out of Malta so you can have them available for other things you might need them to do in the Mediterranean. And that's one of the common themes throughout World War II. Let's be honest, fast merchant ships are always in great demand for the high threat areas, but the slow merchant ships, they can be used in all the other areas. Tends to be why slow merchant ships almost tend to survive the war better. Then you have Operation Hurry, which takes place from Gibraltar on the 31st of July, and using HMS Argus drops off some fighters at Malta. Yes, that's a club run. The convoys operations are supply runs. The club runs are aircraft deliveries. And sometimes they go along with convoys, sometimes they are part of overall other operations going on, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're separate. If you consider, then you have Alexandria to Malta, because that was the preferred route. If you could have kept the Alexandria to Malta route, i.e. if Crete hadn't fallen, and hadn't had what had happened there, and the Alexandria to Malta route had been able to use as the principal supply route for Malta, then you would have had a far safer war and a far easier resupply of Malta throughout the war. Because resupplying Malta from the home of the Mediterranean fleet, i.e. Alexandria, i.e. the eastern Mediterranean, is far easier than the western Mediterranean. Because the western Mediterranean, whilst you're coming in and you've got that lovely area of French, sort of maybe neutral territory, Spanish territory, you are heading into the mouth of a lot of firepower. You are heading into Sicily. You are heading into those areas and Italian North Africa. So there's a lot of different operations that could be carried out against you. There's a lot of different scenarios where people can detect you and monitor your approach. Whereas, conversely, despite the British main strength being in the UK, and therefore coming in from the west, from Gibraltar, the British territory in the Mediterranean is mostly in Egypt and moving along that coast, so that's actually the more secure route for the British to come from. Then you have ME3, which is a Malta to Alexandria run, and an MW3, which is Alexandria to Malta run. Literally they swap over, and as you can see, the same thing happened with MF3 and M4 MF4. Various resupplies going backwards and forwards between those two bases. And during the Battle of Taranto, that is one of the things going on. There are huge convoys being moved around. You know, Taranto is this always trumpeted as this great operation, but when I did a video on it on this channel, I talked about how the fact that Cunningham has a whole myriad of operations going on, including multiple convoys moving capital ships and other assets backwards and forwards across the Mediterranean, moving merchant ships and merchant convoys. This is one of the reasons why the Italians lose track of where the Royal Navy fleet is, because there are so many ship movements going on. You also, very shortly after that, have Operation White, which is HMS Argus again resupplying Malta with some fighters, with some Hurricanes. And then it carries on. Now, I will say this, when a convoy actually has a name, that's usually a far bigger, far more important convoy. Or, in the case of Collar, it could be just more important. It's a Gibraltar to Malta run, it's got to get through. It's got some key supplies on it. We have the Battle of Cape Sparta-Ventnor on the 27th of November. Again, a good example of the fact that, despite some people claiming that Taranto stops the Italian fleet and the Reggio Marina being a threat to the Royal Navy, no, they're still very much fighting, and Cape Sparta-Ventnor happens on the 27th of November. Just a little over a week. Couple of weeks after Taranto. And then you have, again, more runs from Alexandria to Malta, and then the runs of the ships back from Malta to Alexandria. This is the point. The convoys are mostly just running ships around. That is what you're trying to do. You're trying to run those merchant ships around as quickly and as efficiently and effectively as you can. Next year, we have XS, which is Gibraltar to Malta. And one ship sent, none of them lost. We carry on. No ships lost on any of these runs between either Gibraltar, Alexandria, Malta, or Malta and Alexandria. Most of the merchant ships will tend to not transit back from Malta to Gibraltar. Unless you've got a major escort going on, you do not want to do that route. The enemy knows you're there and you're heading through their strongest patch. You don't want to do that. So you tend to do the Malta to Alexandria run. And then we have Operation Winch and Operation Dunlop. Again, HMS Ark Royal supplying aircraft. Doing a good job here. And it's then we get to Operations Tiger and Splice. Gibraltar to Alexandria. 5 ships sent out, 1 lost. That is the run. It's not even supplying Malta. It is supplying Alexandria. It's getting urgent supplies through the Mediterranean to Alexandria. And Operation Splice, well, that's HMS Furious and HMS Ark Royal delivering some more Hurricanes. And during this period, we've had the Battle of Cape Matapan, the Battle of Trigo Convoy, and the Battle of Crete. The Battle of Crete, of course, takes place after Operation Splice. At which point, then, the Royal Navy goes into massive, we must resupply fighters to Malta. And you have Operation Rocket, Operation Tracer, Operation Railway, Operation Railway 2. And as a rule, when there's a 1 and a 2, that means the 1 didn't go to plan. I'm still not sure why they have one of the operations called the Operation Callboy. That just doesn't seem like good naming to me, but we'll leave that to one side. The fact is, the Royal Navy comes up with as wackadoodle names as they can. Hence, there's Operation Astrologer down there, which is a Gibraltar to Malta convoy run. Always fun. Unfortunately, Operation Astrologer fails. But the not named operations afterwards, they get through. Even though there's the Battle of Cape Bon going on, and then the first Battle of Sirte. And even with that going on, those operations still get through. And then we have the 1942 club runs and convoys. And the second battle of Sirte. Again, all this is going on in the Mediterranean. All these operations. And USS Wasp gets involved, including teaming up with HMS Eagle for Operation Bowery. Yeah, Operation Bowery, to resupply Malta with aircraft. They used Wasp. Many of the operations here are resupplies before the Spitfire Mark V or VC comes in, which has, of course, the wing, which can take some extra guns, but also can take the external tanks and take the weight of that, and they can have the range. So they can be adapted to carry a lot of tanks, a lot of fuel, and so they can fly from Gibraltar to Malta, and so they don't need to do the club runs anymore. Once you can fly Spitfires from Gibraltar to Malta, and then you can resupply them, you're great. You're golden. Now, I will have to say that a lot of those aircraft runs, they're often tag-teamed with submarines, which will drop off essential supplies for the aircraft. Things like spare parts for engines, or the components for converting them from, let's say, a flying fuel tanker to an actual fighter. All those things will tend to get dropped off by a submarine. And again, that's another thing you have going on for the Royal Navy submarines. They're doing supply routes. One of the interesting things for the Royal Navy in World War II is just how often their submarines are ordered not to engage the enemy, because their mission is of such importance that they do not want to reveal their location by engaging the enemy and revealing there's a submarine in that area. This leads to some very interesting discussions post-war in the analysis of submarines. Now, some of that has been disclosed to the public and is available to be read in books, but I know of at least one submariner who I've managed to verify the fact that they were on the patrol they said they were, and were in the boat they said they were, doing the mission. They probably doing the mission they were said they were, because it makes sense. I haven't verified whether or not they came as close as they seem to think they did to a German capital ship, but didn't engage because they were ordered not to. So their orders were not to reveal their position. And I can understand why, because they were supposed to do something pretty important to do with one of the even more important SOE operations of World War II, but that is something which I know I'm giving far too many hints to, but I'm also not going to talk about more until I've managed to actually tie down enough information I feel I can actually do a video about it. So I'll just have to be a bit cryptic on that point. It could be a fun video someday. The Year of the Submarine, that'll be a great video if I manage to get the supplies for it. And yeah, still going. 20 minutes in. What can I say? It's a skill. It's also a floppy flat hat. Or flat cat. So, this was a Spitfire VC launching from Wasp during Operation Bowery. One of the more important things for them during these operations was to make sure Malta had enough fighters. But often, some of the fighters from Malta would actually fly on to North Africa, and sometimes it was a accelerated route to get those aircraft to where they were needed in the North African campaign, was to get them to Malta by carrier, then launching them from the carrier to fly to Malta, and then from Malta they'd fly to where they were needed in North Africa. Which I think shows some of the realities of Malta, because we associate Malta with a constant siege, and this idea is that the Italians and the Germans were a constant overbearing threat on it. And there were periods when it really was like that. But there were also periods when it was less of a threat. And I think that can be illustrated by the fact they're prepared to fly fighters on from Malta. They're not just going, no, it's here, we want to keep it, we have to keep it, it's ours, it's ours, it's ours. They're going, no, we can go off. Your priority need is elsewhere. And Malta's a critical strategic point for the Royal Navy. It's a critical strategic position for them in the Mediterranean. It bisects the Italian supply lines going to North Africa. It makes the Italian position massively more difficult. And operations like, well, we just discussed. We go back to 1941, and you see a little operation up here called Battle of Tarango Convoy. Well, that operation is literally the destroyers from Malta going out and hunting and finding their target. And there were a fair number of operations like that. Force K, when it was cruisers or destroyers, was often being used to go and hunt down Italian forces. And again, Malta is great for another thing. When you've got Enigma broken, when you've got the information flowing in from there, well, you can very easily launch an aircraft from Malta. It can spot the enemy, and then the surface ships which you dispatched earlier in the direction because you knew which way they were going can be guided in thanks to that aircraft spotting them. It's brilliant. It provides perfect cover for, yes, we were just lucky we spotted your critical convoy of fuel supplies. We spotted your critical ammunition convoy. Yes, your convoy full of clothing got through. We don't know why. So, Diagram and Splice, I've chosen those because I think they're the best examples I can pick. They are absolutely run of the mill. They're about in the middle of the convoys. They're in 1941, they're in May 1941. They are about as middle of the war in terms of the war in the Mediterranean and the convoy war in the Mediterranean as you can get. Tiger is a perfect normal convoy. They send out 5 merchant ships. 1 gets lost, 4 get to their destination of Alexandria. Operation Splice, again, is HMS Furious and HMS Ark Royal. And if you look down the list of those, Furious and Ark Royal turn up a lot of times. They are a fairly consistent partnership that gives you a pretty average idea of what's going on. And this was the point, really. I wanted to give you an idea of what was going on in the average convoys. Yes, I know that's not probably the exciting thing which is going to get me a lot of views. I know that's not necessarily the thing which is going to drive the algorithm wild. But I pride myself on this channel on doing the nuance, doing the context, and giving you as full a picture of the history as I can with the resources I have available. And let's be honest, it's thanks to you I have the resources I have available to me. It's with your support I'm able to keep buying more and more books. It's with your support I've got better software. It's with your support I've got a lot of better things going on. So it's thanks to all of you. It's thanks to the people watching. It's thanks to the people who chose to become patrons, Ko-fi and memberships, all those things, that I'm able to do this. And this is where we get to an interesting point. There are stats we have to consider. Of the 209 merchant ships convoys, and by that phraseology I mean the 209 ship routes, as in journeys, 30 failed to make it. That's an 85.6% plus success rate from 1940 to 1942. So that's fairly good. Now, in that, there are some notable exceptions. There are some notable periods where it gets a lot tougher. There is the whole Operation Pedestal, which was, let's be honest, really, really not good. But more and more, what happened went quite well. And yes, Operation Pedestal happens towards the end of that period, But the thing is, the war got tougher at the point at which the Regia Marina and the Regia Aeronautica were really actually starting to almost cooperate. And the Regia Aeronautica was really starting to up its game in terms of the anti-ship capabilities. Because the thing is, they usually had very skilled crews, but not many of them. Their best aircraft, as I've talked about, the SM-79 Sparvero, is a good aircraft, but it was being used for so many other missions that only a small fraction of it's being used for the anti-shipping mission. And there's also the reality that even with Pedestal and even with those other big convoys that there was a major attacks against, there was also major defences. You know, the average Royal Navy convoy going up the Arctic wishes it had HMS Nelson providing extra AA firepower by going, wonder if my 16-inch shells will hit the enemy aircraft. I'm not sure. Let's fire some and see. There's a great piece of history about some Italian aircraft attacking Gibraltar, and the group of aircraft flying on, notice these big objects seem to be going past and causing massive disturbance at the end. Not sure what's going on, and then they see one of the aircraft literally collapse inwards. Everything sort of folds up, the wings, everything folds up as if the inside of it just gets crumpled up away from it and disappears. And we're talking the entire sort of airframe. And that was HMS Nelson seeing if her 16-inch shells could be used for AA fire. So yes, the Royal Navy has the policy of we have guns, we can fire it. Now, that's not always helpful, but it's also not exactly harming the situation. I'd also add the most successful convoy runs actually tend to be the Malta to Alexandria runs. And they make up a large number of these. But there again, those ship movements matter, because moving the ships out of Malta and to Alexandria so they can be used again is a critical part of the process, because if they just go to Malta, then aren't able to be used again, then you've lost the ship. Doesn't matter whether it's in Malta afloat, or if it's sunk. If it's stuck at Malta, you've lost it. Just as much as if it's on the bottom of the Mediterranean. And this is why Operation Tiger, like so many other operations, when they are doing full length of the Mediterranean and also resupply of Malta operations, they try for a wider... I want to use the word mascheravica, which is... it's like camouflage, but it's more of a whole force deception. It's a Russian word, originally. And realistically, it means what a tangled web we weave. The more we weave into the web, the more difficult it gets for the enemy to see what we're doing. And the thing about Operation Tiger is it's got shells within shells within shells. So, there are fast merchant ships. There is a whole convoy from the Clyde down to Gibraltar, which has escorts, has repulse with it, has extra destroyers with it, has all sorts of force with it, but no one really will notice that because it's got Queen Elizabeth, it's got destroyers with it, it's got other things with it. So lots of things that mean it's going to have those destroyers and those 15 merchant ships as well. So it looks regular to have the force it does. Probably needs it. And then it splits off, and some of the ships are going down to Freetown and other places in Africa, but 5, they're going through Gibraltar. And they're going to hook up with Force H. They're taking Queen Elizabeth with them. Now the thing is, the merchant ships are not what are running into Gibraltar. And they're not going to run into Malta. They are going to run to Alexandria. They are going to get all the way to Alexandria, because there they're supposed to deliver tanks and planes. And they do that quite well. In fact, with only one vessel being lost, the Empire Song, well, They managed to get 200 out of the 295 tanks they're sent with, only lose 57 of them. Now, what does that mean? That means 238 get delivered. They lose 10 out of the 53 Hurricane fighters they're carrying with them. Well, that means 43 get there. And later on, the Royal Navy does Operation Splice, which I'll be talking about in a second, which runs Hurricanes to Malta, and actually some of their men are flying on to North Africa because they're more needed there. There are peaks and troughs of threats to Malta, and at times when it's not as high a threat, instead they use those times to use Malta as a ferry point and resupply North Africa more quickly with extra aircraft than sending them around Africa. Now, the convoy said that originally sent with is also quite a big convoy. I've talked about this a couple of times, but the Royal Navy and the British force as a whole have a habit of hiding convoys in hiding things in things which they already need to defend. So it doesn't look strange when you've got these sort of ships: Highland Chieftain, Dominion Monarch, Strafford, Clan Campbell, Aronda, Empress of Asia, Reina del Pacifico, Sobreski, Clan Lamont, Empire Song, Clan Chatham, Empress of Russia, New Zealand Star, Abrek, and HMS Pretoria Castle in a group. That's a hefty military convoy. And their escort is pretty hefty as well. At certain points, they have things like Hurricane, Legion, Ottawa, Pirouin, Restouche, and Sanguini escorting them. They have Repulse, Naid. They, of course, have Queen Elizabeth with them. That is a lot of firepower with that convoy. And some of those escorts continue on with that convoy as they go further. But in Operation Tiger's case, this is about running a convoy to full length in the Mediterranean. This is the critical point for the British. The quickest way to resupply their eastern positions is through the Mediterranean. The trouble is, that goes past the Italians. That goes past the Germans. That goes through the Axis forces. Because the same band that Malta sits in, where you can bisect the Italian convoys and the convoy routes running north to south Mediterranean, is the very same passage of water you have to go. Which is why there are so many battles in World War II in the Mediterranean, which are literally convoy of one navy running into convoy of the other navy, and you have the two convoys fighting each other. It makes for a very interesting battlescape. It truly does. With both sides at the same time wanting to get at the enemy's merchant ships while defend their own. Imagine it as two heavyweight boxers where they have one arm free and one arm is holding their grandma behind them and going, "No, Granny, no, you can't get in the way," and having to defend. And the target for each of them is the other one's granny. That's their primary target. Yes, they are very happy to take swipes at each other, but really what they want to do is muller the grandma. That's it. And that's the convoy battles. And Operation Tiger gets the full kitchen sink chucked at it. It truly does. But let's go through some of the forces involved. If I get the right word file up. Yes, there we go. We have it. So, Force H is there, of course. Somerville in charge. Ark Royal, Renown, Sheffield, HMS Harvester, Havelock, and Hesperus. The warships for the Mediterranean Fleet are Queen Elizabeth, Fiji, Gloucester, and I'm thinking Forester and Fury. I think this fits up with their transition through, but there's conflicting notes about which destroyers go where. Okay? This is the really fun thing. We know 6 of the destroyers go into Malta to resupply it. Believe it or not, I've read now 3 different accounts which claim to be online copies of documents from the National Archives, and helpfully that's one of the few documents I don't have my own picture of, that all say different lists of destroyers going in to do the supply run. They all agree on Faulkner, Kashmir, and Kipling. Most of them agree on Fearless, Foresight, and Fortune. I think that's probably the likely set of 6 delivering the supplies to Malta. Now, this is the force going through, and what would happen is Force H will escort the convoy so far. Then the warships from the Mediterranean fleet will keep with the convoy, of course, going through, as will the supply destroyers, which then break off when they are passing Malta, go into Malta, resupply from Breckenshire, which is part of the convoys which are running from from Alexandria, which are being run to Malta. And there are 5 merchant ships making that route in a 2 and a 3 group, and they're coming from and they're going. Those merchant ships will resupply Malta, and also one of them, Breckenshire, is literally there to fuel up the destroyers, so they can then make the run back to Gibraltar and follow Force H. Oh, and by the way, whilst doing that, they're also going to go and do a bombardment of Benghazi. Because, again, you have to make this as complicated and convoluted as possible. So the Italians really are going, what the frigate are the British doing now? I mean, they're over there, they're over there, they're over there, they're over there. What are they doing? What are they doing? And the results, as said, are pretty good. Now they get most of their resources through. It's not without a lot of fighting. It is a lot of fighting. But in a way, they do quite... It's a lot of fighting, but it's also a lot of nothing. Because whilst the British forces are heavily concentrated to defend their convoy, especially as they go through the maximum threat, the Italian reconnaissance aircraft spot them some point on the 8th. And the attacking aircraft soon arrive with SM-79s, that's the Savio Machetti aircraft, operating both in the level bomber and the torpedo bomber roles. The torpedo bombers are far more dangerous than the level bombers. But the Regia Aeronautica doesn't really like to focus in on the torpedo bombers. They are worried that they are too high risk, and they require too much training. And they're escorted by CR-42s, Fiat fighters. They try for renown, they try for Ark Royal, and both successfully evade the torpedoes. They have advantages in that they are operating a full air defense system. They have fighters flying off from Ark Royal, breaking up the strikes as they come into manageable groups. They have the heavy AA blasting away, they have room to maneuver, and they have lots of their own fire as well, which means they're not even able to get to the merchant ships. Even the vaunted Ju-87s and Bf-1110s, well, they end up fighting the Fulmars, and the Fulmars are not coming off badly. They find the Ju-87 to be a very nice target, and they're quite happy with the Bf-110 as well. They're very good pilots, and don't get me wrong, they're giving as good as they get, but they are certainly not both sides aren't pulling their punches, but the German punches aren't getting through to the ships. The Axis forces are not able to hit the British Grandma. Not on this occasion. Also, it doesn't help that Grandma really has teeth. Some of these ships were described as functioning hedgehogs. They seem to have acquired systems from all over the places. And what's even worse for the Axis forces, they're not even quite sure, because they see this massive convoy on one side, and on the other side of Malta, in the eastern Mediterranean, there is another convoy going on because of these ships, and there's the full Mediterranean fleet out. So they're actually also conducting operations against them, and finding Formidable and all the battleships with her, blasting away happily. And Formidable, of course, is putting up her own fighters and doing operations with those. In fact, it's evening by the time the Italians managed to launch another torpedo attack. They launched about 3 during the day, and they launched another one at night. And again, they're pressed home with determination, but again, they suffered no real damage. In fact, the only damage which was realistically afflicted was Renown upon herself, when one of her portside 4.5-inch gun mountings suffered what we would categorise as control failure. And it fired into the rear of another 4.5-inch mounting, killing 6 and wounding 26 of the gun's crew. The only loss to the Convoy. The only loss to the Convoy. And this is despite pretty much all the F-class destroyers and everything else, which is why I think it was the F-class which made up the major group going into Malta, because it makes sense. They're the ones doing a lot of minesweeping in this point, as are some sloops. Despite all that effort, Empire Song got hit by 2 mines, and New Zealand Star got damaged by a mine. And Empire Song is lost. They also managed to mount a torpedo attack at HMS Queen Elizabeth, but she apparently does a maneuver which is described as kicking her stern towards the torpedo, which caused it to veer off course. I'm not sure how you do that in a Queen Elizabeth class battleship, but it sounds rather cool, and I would like to learn more. I'm going to be looking into this. What is the kicking your stern maneuver? They get in, they get out. The merchant ships get to Alexandria, the merchant ships from Alexandria get to Malta. And that's the important thing. That's what you're looking for. That's what you need to have happen. And then it's followed up, because you've got a lot of supplies to Malta. You've got a lot of things needed there that they needed, which were high value but low volume, hence you could use the destroyers to run them in. Now it's time to get the things which are going to make use of those supplies to Malta. Now, Operation Splice builds on Operation Tiger. This is how you run operations. This is how a professional war is fought. We think about the high tension times, the big massive battles, far more often than we really should when we're studying warfare. And we often think about the scenarios when it goes wrong, when there are problems. And I would argue with Pedestal, the example I would give is the British do not have enough forces available to do a proper massacre of Oka. They don't have enough forces available to do the complex operation they need to do to make Pedestal work. So all they can do is put enough forces into Pedestal to try and give it the best shot of getting through, rather than do all the look over here, look over here, look over here, what am I doing over there, what am I doing over there, what am I doing over there, what am I doing here, everywhere, which is how you need to run it. It's traditionally also how the British have run war, and it's traditionally how successful powers have run naval wars. It's by the volume of operations you accomplish that you almost get things done, because the enemy is not sure where to deploy their resources to. It's the ability of sea power is to be able to be deployed to cover multiple things and move quickly between different positions and react. As I talked about before with aircraft carriers, they can be over here, striking over there, and then they can be over here, striking over there within a day. And where do you deploy your forces to defend? Because if you don't have your forces over here to defend there, well then that gets hit without any problems. And if you don't have your forces here, but they're too far away to support each other, you can't put something in the middle to defend both. So, what do you do? And what happens if there's another target in the middle that they might attack? You have to be everywhere. You have to be strong everywhere. They only have to be strong where they attack. And now Operation Splice comes in. And Operation Splice is a pretty darn cool operation again. Because it starts off, and this is what I love about the club runs, okay? So, Furious brings the aircraft down from the Clyde. They bring them down from Britain. And let's consider her escort for this operation is far more to the normal of what the British had pre-war had actually pretty much carried out with carrier escorts. She has HMS London, the 8-inch counter-gun county cruiser, the modernised one, which was carrying an extra 575 service personnel aboard her, but still part of the escort. And the escort is HMS Brilliant, HMS Legion, HMS Mashona, HMS Tartar. So she has a heavy cruiser and 4 destroyers, 2 of which are tribal, one of which is an L-class, which is known for being really annoying when it wants to be to anyone, and one is HMS Brilliant, which is just brilliant. What more do I need to say? It's brilliant. And those are actually replaced by Fearless, Harvester, Havelock, and Wrestler when they are at a certain point across the Bay of Biscay. They literally swap destroyers out. They have a fighting heavy destroyer escort, and then they change to an ASW heavy escort. The threat changes, so the escort changes. And the Royal Navy's running that. Also, that creates a strange thing for everyone watching, because, hang on, where are those destroyers going? Where are those destroyers going? What are they doing? What's this force going on? Which convoy is this? Because those destroyers don't match what we had on the details of this convoy. But it's still got a carrier and a cruiser. On the 18th of May, when they reached Gibraltar, Furious berthed stern to stern with Ark Royal. Perfectly normal manoeuvre. And then what they did was they stuck a timber ramp between the two ships' round downs on across their sterns, and transferred 20 Hurricane fighters and 5 Fairey Fulmars between the two ships. And then what do? They depart on the 19th of May, basically the next day. But at this point, they've got to that level of commonality and a regularity of doing this kind of procedure, of erecting these wooden bridges between the round downs. It's nothing to them. They get it done, they get them moving. There is even discussion as to if the sections, the bridge, was actually left permanently on the side. I think it was. But there's a huge discussion of where was it, and does anyone have any pictures of it, and some historians have decided that basically because there were no pictures taken of this pile of wood that would have been it, and basically wooden sections, it must not have existed. I can understand that, show me the evidence, but then to me there's also the basic laziness or inventiveness or laid-backness of your average sailor and naval officer, in that would they want to keep building and then building and scrapping a wooden bridge? Yes, they will need to modify its lengths, because if they are transferring between Furious and Ark Royal, or Argus and Furious, or other ships, they are going to be they are going to be different. But you could still have something pretty much made ready to go, and you've got enough constructors around, you've got enough engineers, you've got enough sailors, you've got enough personnel with carpentry experience around, that I'm fairly sure you could put something together decent fairly quickly that would be usable and reusable. And that would make sense to me. So, yes, no pictures, but I'm in the camp that firmly believes there was something pre-made, ready to go and ready to use. It just seems too stupid for there not to be. Come on, can you imagine someone like Somerville going, you know what, I'm going to have a system whereby I'm going to be waiting for them to build a new one every single time to do this? Or would he go, okay, erect the bridge. We've already got the bridge pieces. Chunk, chunk, chunk. Now, what they did was they launched 48 Hurricanes with 5 Fulmars to guide them to Malta. So they go out with Force H, they launched their aircraft, and the aircraft the ships then returned to Gibraltar arriving on 22nd of May. Now, they also send out 3 Martin Maryland aircraft from Malta to act as extra escorts. So of all this work, what are the results? Well, of the 48 Hurricanes flown off the carriers, 1 crashes off Cape Bon and 1's logged as missing. 46 reach Malta. Now, 5 Fulmars also reach Malta, and they go on to HMS Formidable. Yay! New Fulmars! We needed them. And the Martin Marylands carry on operating from Malta. This is the point. This is what they're doing. They are pushing around. They are carrying out these operations to reinforce their positions. And that is an advantage for the Royal Navy, because this operation didn't run into that many opposition. Let's be honest, they managed to go to a patch of water where they are close enough to Malta to launch the aircraft without too much trouble and give them a good chance of reaching there, but far enough away from the Italian areas of strength that the Italians really aren't there. Again, an advantage of carriers, an advantage of the Royal Navy's fleet at this time. Scandi ship 2024. Sorry to interrupt this, and I will be getting back, going on more with this discussion, because I have more to say, particularly Operation Rocket, which is the next club run after Operation Splice. But please note, there is a link below to Scandi ship 2024. Yes, the shipshape crew are off voyaging again. We are off to Scandinavia. We are off to Norway, Oslo, Narvik. Basically, we've managed to change some things around. There's been, believe it or not, an iron ore train derailment on the line, but to Narvik, and this means that instead of us doing the train journey, we're flying from Oslo to Narvik and returning back by the same route. So that means we actually get some time in Oslo, which I know my good friend Drakenafel already has sincere plans of what he's going to do with that, but I have plans as well, and my plans are mostly to hopefully meet some of you in Oslo. We're also hoping to meet some of you in Karlskrona, in Stockholm, in Narvik, in Helsinki, and Gothenburg. And, well, it'll be fun. I have to say, though, again, these things are all made possible by you. Especially, this channel's made possible by your support. These trips are certainly made possible by your support. This year, we've got to raise a little over $3,000 per person. And there've got to be 5 of us going, because we are hoping to get to blow some things up. And as I've already mentioned in some videos, for that to happen, and when I say things, I mean just do some experiments and demonstrate. We're not going to blow up buildings or anything like that. I am not going to get that level of insurance with Drakenafel. No, to do what we might be able to do. We're hopefully having to take a chemist with us. So we've got a 5th member of the group tagged on, called another gentleman called Dan, who's going to be there. That will be fun. And so, yes, we need to raise somewhere in the region of 16. Probably better if we end up with 18, but 16 is enough for us to all go. Grand. Which is a lot of money. It is a lot of money in YouTube. If you consider my channel's average, I would say this channel gets, all told, a little over $1,000 a month. So it is more than the amount of money my channel gets a year. Which is both scary and lovely, because I know how much was donated last year for Australia. I know how much was donated, and those trips really make a difference. I know the videos for Australia on my channel haven't come out yet. They were delayed by my mum being ill at Christmas and all the other things we've had come up, which has been discussed in this, to say, apologise. But those videos are going to come out this Christmas 2024. Touch wood. And they're going to be combined with some Scandinavia videos in 2024. And so hopefully all of that is going to be great. And we will have a wonderful time. And we will get some wonderful history and videos recorded. And you will get even more videos of me crawling beneath boilers, because there are videos of me crawling beneath boilers. HMS Vampire, I hope to see you again one day and get to crawl beneath your boilers once more. I'm sure someone will actually at that point specifically instruct me not to do that, but no one told me no before I did it. I didn't ask permission, but they'd left it open, they'd shown me the way in, they were practically begging for me to do it, okay? I took a camera and I crawled beneath the boiler. Any self-respecting naval historian would do the same thing. Yes, it's a 70-year-old, roughly, destroyer. Maybe a bit older than that. And yes, it's still floating in water, and yes, it had only just been fixed after they'd found lots of holes in its hull. But, you know, it was fine. It was dry down there. I can tell you that because I crawled on it. Scandinavia, Scandi Ship 2024 is going to be great. It's going to probably be mildly insane as well, knowing all of us, but it will be great. And that's all will be thanks to your support. So there's a link down below explaining more about it, and there are going to be more details to come soon, including a full list of where we're going to be, when we're going to be, which museums, and all those things. I'm just finalising those details. Operation Rocket. Now, why have I included Operation Rocket on this? I talked about Splice and Tiger. Well, I added it into the live as a bit of a bonus, and I'm going to add it into this as a bit of a bonus, because it is a bonus. It truly is. This time, it was HMS Argus delivering the aircraft to Furious and Ark Royal. But she'd had even more fun, because they'd been loaded aboard her crated, and she actually assembled them on board while she was on her way down from Clyde to Gibraltar. Then she gets to Gibraltar, she rolls roughly 48 aircraft onto Furious and onto Ark Royal. And there are, in the end, they have 44 put aboard those ships. 20 on Furious, 24 on Ark Royal. The other 4 were landed in Gibraltar to secure their defence. And this is quite a normal thing, okay? When Furious brought down her set, she landed some in Gibraltar for local defences. This is another point about Gibraltar. It's always getting supplies. It's one of those things when people go, they're talking about Gibraltar in World War II, and they're going, oh, yeah, you know, it could have been taken by Spain. It is literally always getting bits dropped off. Gibraltar is one of the few places which is never wanting for things. Fortress Gibraltar has a lot of firepower on it. And yes, the airport might not be in the best place, but it's going to cause trouble for anyone. The aircraft will cause trouble. They do have a fighter patrol. They do have a full air defense ring going on. And they usually have some very heavy units there who would like to go, hello. What happens when you apply a 16-inch shell to a tank? I don't know. Let's find out. Nelson and Rodney were well-known experimenters. They were true scientists of ships. Anyway. They went out and did their trip again. But this time, there are some Blenheim aircraft. 8 Blenheims fly from Gibraltar. They pick up the fighters as they launch. 43 get away. 1 returns with defects. 43, escorted by the 8 Bristol Blenheims, arrive at Malta. One of the Blenheims actually detoured whilst on way and made a nice little reconnaissance of Mers el Kabir, just to check what the Dunkirk was up to. And that's how they do it. Furious then departs for the UK, actually catches up with Argus at sea en route, and both carriers arrive at Clyde on the 14th of June, in company with a liner, the Aenean Hellas, escorted by Cossack, Maori, Sikh, and other ships, and they do it all again. That's the point, really, of these operations. The fact that the Royal Navy keeps repeating them and sustaining them. And the problems come for the Royal Navy, largely in World War II, and for other navies in World War II, this is just the same. The problems come not when they're doing the routine operations, not when they've got into a rhythm of operations. It comes when they cannot maintain that rhythm. When there are things that come up they cannot plan for, and their rhythm is disrupted. Which is, of course, the point of the enemy operations. Your purpose as when you're fighting an enemy is to disrupt their rhythm operations, to give them dilemmas, not problems, dilemmas. Problems have solutions. Dilemmas have equally bad choices. That is what you're aiming to give them. The fact that the Royal Navy manages to keep it up for so long, so often, in so many different ways, and same with the US Navy, shows the force disparity, in that they are able to maintain enough slack force, to an extent, on enough purpose on other roles, that they can usually cover for most things without disrupting what they've got going on. Still, that is an ongoing issue. That is something you have to think about and have to focus on, because for Britain, supplying Malta was of critical importance, and supplying the Mediterranean fleet was of critical importance, supplying the North Africa campaign was of critical importance, and sometimes you need to do these convoys. And again, the scenario comes back to not just the 1920s, but the 1930s, and the decisions made at the beginning of World War II. If you want a roadmap to bad decision making, you can look at some of the government's decisions. Because they're usually short term. In fact, most bad decisions any government's ever made have been guided by short term impulses. What do I mean by short term impulses? Well, just as if you decide you're going to save time by cutting what you can describe as non-essential maintenance in wartime to allow aircraft to generate more hours, you are building up problems for the future. Short term, yes, you can increase your hours of operation of those aircraft. Long term, you are doing more damage to the airframes and systems, so you're going to have to probably replace those aircraft far sooner. And also, you're building up for a bigger maintenance bill at some point, which could mean that at a decisive point, instead of you having to deal with a constant lower number of aircraft, a slightly lower number of aircraft available due to doing ongoing maintenance, you suddenly have a big drop in aircraft availability because suddenly a lot of things start going wrong, and you need to fix them. With governments, it's usually a case of, we have a short-term spending issue. We have a short-term spending problem. We'd like to not invest in this. You could argue in the 1920s and 30s, the big problems the British did, realistically, even under the treaty system, they didn't invest enough in destroyers and sloops. They're smaller ships. Destroyers do have limitations. There are limitations imposed on them, but sloops, you can build as many as you like. Destroyers, you can build as many as you like under the Washington Treaty, the same with sloops. Sloops, you can still build as many as you like, i.e. ships under 2,000 tons, not designed to be for speeds greater than 20 knots, or designed to have to carry torpedoes. Remember that line, designed for? They're not designed to. But if they do, oh, well, it just turned out our designers were not as good as we hoped. They couldn't design a ship which could do less than 20 knots. It's terrible, really. It's terrible. Exact phraseology. Designed to. If they happen to go faster, well, that wasn't our intention of the design. Sorry. If you'd kept up a constant flow of production of sloops on ships like that across the world, so especially with the British, in the Empire, in the Dominions, in Britain, A, you could have kept yard infrastructure going a little bit easier, and B, You'd have been in a far stronger position come World War II with anti-submarine warfare escorts, etc., far more numerous convoy escorts, and a lot of the decisions made by, for example, Winston Churchill, which was an incredibly ill-informed decision to pause carrier and capital ship and cruiser construction to do a crash build of escorts, which had already been ordered, so he actually managed to disrupt all the programs by doing it because he was panicking because he couldn't see enough numbers. Whereas if you'd had a constant program of sloops under construction, let's say 16 a year, since 1920, and they would probably have they could have easily, considering there are some World War I Flower class sloops still serving with the Royal Navy in World War II and doing a good account of themselves in anti-submarine warfare operations, I'm fairly sure 1920 sloops could have been doing a fairly good job. You know, some of the World War I vessels actually get refitted with ASDEC. That's the point. They are designed to be good anti-submarine warfare merchant ships, and in the era when you're not doing rafting of machinery and you're not including all sorts of computer power and all sorts of things in them, when you just want a vessel which can keep pace with a convoy and go a little bit faster so it can go off and intercept and catch up the convoy again, and has some guns to do the AA work and can carry depth charges and carry an ASDEC, that's all you want. That's not a complicated design challenge. And the fact that sloops can also be used for mine laying, mine sweeping, for all sorts of diplomatic operations and presence missions, could be stuck in reserve for reservists, you could have kept that going. And this is a favourite hobby horse of mine, yes, but if you think about that, if you kept 16 sloops a year, or 18 sloops a year, 2 flotillas, it's 9 ships in a flotilla, like the destroyers. Well, if it had been 18, then between 1920 and 1939, you'd have had 342 sloops built. Even if you, let's say, only kept them for 10 years, you'd still have 180 sitting ready to go. That's 20 convoy escorts groups ready to go. You'd have had no pause of carrier construction, you'd have had no pause of capital ship construction or cruiser construction. And then you'd have had more carriers available. And you wouldn't have had the dilemmas of, if we send the carriers to do this in the Mediterranean, we don't have the carriers to do this in the North Atlantic, and we then don't have the carriers available for Force Z. So we're sending 2 capital ships when we know it's not our doctrine to do that, when we know carriers were supposed to be part of that. The Royal Navy, from about 1924 onwards, in their war plans for the Far East, the very first ships which were supposed to be sent to the Far East included carriers. It was carriers and battle cruisers. That was the rapid group which was supposed to go out there to help secure Singapore, help defend Singapore while the battle fleet rolls up. And then from Singapore they go on and secure the Entreponts and go north. There is no scenario where that should have been the case. And you also think about it, with all those sloops, with that force, and if you kept building them, especially being turbine powered, you'd have had far greater turbine construction of the turbines you need for destroyers and sloops. And you could have really ramped up destroyer construction prior to the war. And that would have meant for these style operations, you'd have had more destroyer escorts, probably sloops as well, which could surprisingly keep up. And those greater number of escorts would have allowed you to do more of the Mascavoca, of more of the covering operations, more of the 4 destroyers turning up somewhere and blasting away at a target. They bombarded Benghazi. They didn't do an airstrike on it, they bombarded it. Why? Because it showed that where we were. It gave them a very firm point of contact. These ships are here. It does damage, yes. It also shows where we are. And while they're looking for us there, they're not looking for us elsewhere. While they're trying to get that group, they're not seeing what the other groups are doing. There is an old phrase, quantity is a quality all of its own. It's not quite correct. Quantity is opportunity. Quantity allows you to do more things. It gives you the opportunity to take advantage of certain situations, and it gives you the opportunity to make other situations far more complicated for your opponent. That is what quantity is. It's not a quality, it's opportunity. These operations, these convoys, these club runs, they are good examples of opportunity. And they're good examples of, when it's used well, how it works. Because despite the best efforts of the Regia Aeronautica, of the Regia Marina, of the Luftwaffe, of all the submarines that could get there, they lose one ship to mines. That's annoying. But they recover the crew, they get on, and they get the vast majority of the force through. And that's also how they get the vast majority of those convoys through. I always end these videos with a question. And I know I say that in almost every video, but that's because there could be a new viewer who's kind of surprised that I'm ending a video with a question for everyone, and that then turns up as a bit of theme in the comments. But it's always it's a tradition I do, because I end my university lectures with a question for the students to go away and think about. In this scenario, I've discussed a lot about the different operations going on, how you cover things, and how you deploy forces. Today, of course, we would probably try and do a load of dummy operations using drones and various other assets and electronic warfare. They weren't exactly backward in coming forward with that idea in World War II either. There are huge chaff clouds and other things deployed at various bombing attacks, and during D-Day. But I want you to think about it. If you were to make a modern-day Malta run, you can even pick Malta if you want as your thing you're running to resupply, but pick whichever place you want. How would you be wanting to do it? If you were set the task today to resupply them, and you had to get enough supplies through that you couldn't do it by air, there was no chance of you delivering those supplies by air. Sheer volume, quantity, and weight. After all, if you put it another way, think about this. If to get that same volume through is going to require 2/3 to 90% of your airlift capacity to deliver it, and it's going to put that all at risk, that's going to be spotted. And the only thing more difficult to defend in a heavily contested war zone than a merchant ship laden is a load of transport aircraft laden. Because at least the merchant ship can hide behind the horizon. I love transport aircraft. They are incredibly essential for modern warfare, and they are incredibly vital, which is one of the reasons why I don't think they will get used as much as some others do. Because they are so vital, you want to protect them. What have we got coming up? Next week we have Carriers of the Warfleet. Ooh, that should be fun. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the videos, please do consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to support the various book addictions and Iron Brew addictions to keep the channel going, well, there is Patreon, there is Ko-fi, and there is membership of the channel. and all mean a lot and all are really helpful. Thank you very much, take care, and have a nice evening.